Welcome to the Commercial Property Podcast. My name is Suzi Carter. I am a chartered surveyor. I've been involved in commercial property in the UK for 30 years and I've done hundreds of commercial property deals. I'm here to be your guide through the commercial property market, whether you're an experienced investor or whether you're literally thinking about dipping your toe in the world of commercial real estate. I will be here talking to you about all kinds of things commercial real estate in the UK, and I've also got some fantastic guest experts who are joining me. So please do subscribe if you'd like to follow, and if you'd like any more help or information on commercial real estate, please do click www.suzicarter.com, which is my website, and you can find out all the ways I can help you. So stay tuned for this week's episode. Welcome back, and today we are talking about how to find the yield. So out of everything that I help my clients with, I think the probably number one aspect of commercial property that people struggle with is the commercial yield. And so I thought I'd just do this podcast on that and explain a little bit more about commercial yields and explain how you can find out what the yield is on a property that you're looking at. Because the art of valuation is an art, not a science. And this is what makes it super difficult. If we were to have a yield guide, because there are yield guides out there, plenty of the big agents do that. But if there was a yield guide that told you exactly every type of property what yield there was, that would be easy. But the fact is, it doesn't quite work like that. So let me explain how commercial yields work and how you can find out what the yield is for the property that you are looking at. So first of all, let's look at what is a commercial yield. So if you're a residential investor, forget everything you know about residential yields. This is commercial yields we're talking about. So when we value commercial properties and we want to find the capital valuation, the calculation we look at is annual rent divided by yield. What that means is that every time you increase the rent, you're going to increase your capital value. So hopefully that's relatively straightforward, and there's lots of ways you can do that, which we can go into on a future episode. Then you're looking at the yield. Now this yield is the multiplier that you apply to the rent to give you the capital value. And this is why when we're looking at commercial property, we can do paper-based exercises, we can let vacant properties, we can extend leases, we can do surrenders and re-grants and not necessarily have to put a spade in the ground, because if you change the lease, the rent, the tenant, then you have the potential to add value to the property. So this yield, this multiplier, is called the all risks yield. And the reason it's called the all risks yield is because it basically does exactly what it says on the tin. It reflects the risk of the property, and it's the only way that a valuer can actually reflect all the risk of the property. And as I say, it's an art, not a science. So you might have a general yield for a particular town, but then you'll adjust it for the particular property. So for example, if a property down the road, very similar type of property, which was let, had a yield of say 8% and your property is vacant, there's more risk associated with that property. So it might be at 8.5% because it's vacant, or it might be a bit further out, a bit higher because maybe it's in a different part of town or whatever. So the risk that the yield reflects is everything from the state of the market. Are we in an up cycle or a down cycle? The sector that you're buying in, is it retail or logistics? Very different sentiment around both of those. The location of the property is super interesting, super important in terms of the type of location, not only in terms of the town or the city that you're locating in, but your micro location within that town or city, and how you your location is going to reflect the quality of the property, the chances of you letting the property, the type of tenant you're going to get, the type of lease you're going to get. So location is super important. Then we're looking at any repair on the property, is there a problem, is it dilapidated, is it brand new? There'll be a difference in yield on that. Is it occupied or vacant? Obviously, a vacant property is going to be more risky than an occupied property. If it's occupied, is it a 6-month lease or is it a 20-year lease? What's the tenant like? Is it a blue chip tenant like a food store, or is it a startup shop, a local shop? What guarantors do you have in the rent if it is a local tenant? What kind of rent is there? What kind of mechanisms are there in the lease to increase the value of the rent? Are there rent reviews in the lease? Is it a freehold or is it a leasehold? What's the length of the leasehold? Is a 45-year leasehold, then that's going to be not as attractive as a freehold. And yeah, what's the rent? What's the tenant? What's the lease like? And any other factors that are basically affecting the property. Is there some hope value, etc.? And this yield is a number, is a figure that can reflect all those kind of risks. So there are different types of yield. We have the initial yield, which is basically the yield of the rent passing when you buy the property. We have the reversionary yield, which is maybe when you sell or when a rent review or a lease renewal kicks in. We have an equivalent yield, which is basically like an average yield across your hold period. But let's think about this yield as an all-risk yield, because whichever yield you're calculating, the principle is still the same. So what a valuer will do is a valuer will look at that property, they'll look at comparable evidence, and they'll get that through their own research, their contact with agents, etc. And they will compare and contrast your property with the comparable evidence. So, as I said earlier, if you've got a property down the road that's maybe exactly the same, but is tenanted and you're vacant, your yield's going to be worse than a property that other property. It's not going to be as good because it's more risky because it's vacant. And just something to note on commercial yields, that a higher yield in commercial property means that the property is more secondary, that the property is cheaper, and a lower yield, it's more prime, and it's more expensive. So pre Liz Truss budget, we were looking at prime logistics yields of like 2.5%, and now that's moved out now to in the 4s and 5s. But they're prime yields, and then you've got 15% plus of more risky, more secondary, tertiary type properties, and then obviously you've got everything in between. So and yield can obviously vary with markets. So that we've seen that recently. So in a down market, all your yields will move out, and so you'll be buying it at a lower price in a down market, and your yield will reflect that. And as the market grows, obviously the market risk reduces as markets recover. And, especially if you're on a growth sector or there's something happening in that particular location that increases tenant demand, then, a valuer will use their skill to tweak the yield. So it can seem really confusing if you're new to commercial, this all risks yield, but just think of it as a bundle of all the risks associated with the property. So if you're looking at, say, a market town, so there's a lot of market town, we call them 8%ers. They've always been 8% yield. Places like Chichester, little Suffolk villages, nice, slightly twee type market towns, really attractive, pleasant places. And, a lot of the commercial property, the retail, is 8%. And it always has been. When I started out in property in 1995, they were 8% towns. And they still are today. But if you've got a property that's in prime pitch and tenanted, you'll probably get 8%. If you're on the outskirts, you've got a vacant property, then a valuer might look at 8.5% or 8.75%, because it's more risky, because there's a shorter lease, or there's no tenant in place, or the lease is about to expire, or something like that. So what you want to do is you want to be working out kind of a ballpark of what your yield is. So when you're looking at opportunities, you can actually use a yield to basically value the property. Now, the reason that I recommend niching, there's so many reasons why I recommend niching in commercial property. There's so many different types of commercial. There's so many different locations you can invest in. You need to understand rents, leases, tenant demand, the market, where's prime pitch, secondary pitch, tertiary pitch, occupancy rates, etc., etc. You need to build relationships with commercial agents. So it's about being an inch wide and a mile deep. It's about not being too scattergun, because I'm telling you, it's really hard work if you are scattergun investing and having to do all this research every time you find a new investing location. And this is particularly true with regard to commercial yields, because it's an art, not a science, because there is an art, and because it can be tweaked, you really need to get under the skin of what commercial yields are in that location. And it's interesting, I'm working with a lot of clients who are doing deals in one particular town, and they're getting valuation reports, and they're understanding, I've spent a long time yesterday on a call with a client, and we went through in a lot of detail this valuation report. And actually, once you've been through that process, if he's buying something else in that town again, he will have a very, very clear idea right from the outset what his commercial yield is going to be. And, you can very quickly become an expert in this stuff. You just need to start, and you need to gain that experience. And obviously buying something in that location is a great way of doing that. But if you haven't bought anything in that investing location and you're trying to start from scratch, how do you find out what the yield is? Well, I'm going to take you through a little steps of a process that hopefully will help you with that.
This episode is brought to you by Bond Finance Limited, your trusted partner for commercial property mortgage solutions. Are you an experienced residential property investor about to diversify into commercial property, looking for funding options? Bond Finance can help. Whether you're planning to expand, refinance, or make a major property investment, Bond Finance provides expert advice with access to a wide range of lenders, from high street to specialist. Book a free discovery session today to explore how we can tailor commercial funding solutions to your unique investment strategy. Visit www.bondfinanceltd.co.uk and take the next step in your commercial finance journey.
So, first of all, we want to, we've looked at a property, and say we don't know that particular investing location well. So what we're going to do, first of all, is we're going to go onto the portals, and we're going to look at some comparable evidence. So we're going to look at letting evidence, and we're going to look at investment evidence, so sales, and we're going to look at lettings. So if there's a rent on the subject property, obviously that's great evidence. It depends when that rent was set. If it was set pre-COVID, or is it set post-COVID, or has it been set in the last year, 6 months? Obviously the more up to date that evidence is, the more likely it is to be accurate. So the rent on the property that you're buying may not be the open market rent, because it might be historic, or the market might have changed since that rent was obtained. So what you want to do is you want to go on to Property Link Estates Gazette, LoopNet. You want to go on to Rightmove Commercial, Zoopla Commercial. You want to look at CoStar if you've got it. You can do this research through Searchland and Nimbus. You can look at Property Filter. Look at whatever prop tech you want to use. But you do a desktop exercise of looking at what else is on the market, both to rent and for sale. What that will give you a good idea of is what the ballpark rents are. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that your rent's going to be the same for properties to let, but at least you can see kind of the flavours. So when I look at properties on the portals, I'm going, well, this one's more prime than mine, so it's going to be higher. This one's a different shape and configuration. It's very different, so I probably won't take that one into account. And I'll kind of go through a process of elimination and just thinking about what the right comparables are. Then I'll do a similar exercise for things for sale. And again, I'll say, well, that one's much better than mine. That one's not. That one's worse. And if there's rents on those properties, what I'll do is I'll do rent divided by capital value, and I'll work out the yield. So you can start to get a really good flavour just from things that are on the market of where the yield should be, and also where the rent should be, etc. Now, sometimes obviously these are asking prices, so aren't always accurate. So what we really want is comparables, and this is where things like Searchland's premium package, where there's comparables, and also things like CoStar come in, because they have comparable evidence, and you can look at them and say, okay, well, that one next door sold 12 months ago for this, and I think the yield would be similar, or whatever else it might be. So you want to kind of try and find that kind of comparable evidence before you speak to any agents, before you speak to anybody. If there's nothing, then fine, you haven't got any evidence, and you'll have to find it out a different way. But the reason we're doing this exercise is, first of all, to get a flavour of that market and just understand it a bit better. But also, when we speak to commercial agents, we want to make sure that we've got some form of education, knowledge, so that we're not just calling cold. Because one of the pet hates of commercial agents is people who they've never spoken to before, trying to pump them for information. A lot of my clients say commercial agents are really obstructive, etc. Well, they are and they aren't. It depends who you're talking to. But what they aren't in the market for is time wasters. And you might not be a time waster, but they've never spoken to you before. They don't know you. So the onus is on you to improve your credibility. So part of that is through speaking the lingo. Part of that is through having done some research before. Obviously, if you bought a property through that agent before, then you're going to have loads of credibility with them. Other ways of doing it is saying, I'm a cash buyer, I've got a big lump sum to invest, I want to move quickly, things like that. They're all music to commercial agents' ears. You could say, I asset manage on behalf of a number of people. That may or may not be true. Obviously, we mustn't kind of lie to people, but there might be various ways that you can obtain your credibility with commercial agents. But one of them is that you will have some market knowledge. So it might be a brand new market that you've never looked at before, but because you've done some desktop research, you've started to get a flavour of it. So we call the selling agent. Now, bearing in mind the selling agent is obviously going to be biased and is going to be on the side of the seller. So we listen to what they say and take it with a bit of a pinch of salt. Some will be brutally honest, and I totally respect them for that. Others will kind of they will stick with the party line and kind of not really give that much away. It just depends. That's a personality thing. So call them up, and then, rather than saying, oh, okay, I see you've got this on the market. What's the yield? What's the rent? You're pumping them for information. You can say, oh, I've looked at I'm new to this market, but I've looked at the comparables and I think the yield is ballpark this. And then, whenever I've done this, agents usually say, you know what, I think it's more like Y. You think it's 8%, I think it's more like 7.5% or whatever. And then you'll chat through the rent. You might chat through the background. Why is the vendor selling? How long has it been on the market for? Have you had any other interest? What about tenant demand? If it's vacant, you can pump them for that kind of information. Have a little list of questions ready to go. And what's the yield now? So that gives you've done your desktop research, you've spoken to the selling agent, you're starting now to get a picture of what that looks like in terms of the yield. Then what you must do is speak to third-party agents, so local agents who are acting in that town, who specialise in that type of property, or do that type of property, transact in that type of property, but have no vested interest. So again, they're not in the market for time wasters. So, I'm looking at buying a property in this location. I'm looking at one in particular at the moment, but what I'm looking for is an agent to build a relationship with, to let properties, to manage them for me, etc. There needs to be something in it for them. And again, rather than just pumping them from information. So you have that introduction, and what you want to be doing is saying to the agent, what's your gut feel on yield, on rent? Do you have any comparables that you'd be willing to share with me? Can we talk about tenant demand? what kind of rents, leases that you get in place? Do you have a list of people that are waiting for that, or do you think the demand's quite thin? How long do you think the property would be on the market for if we had it on to let, etc., etc.? And if an agent knows there's something in it for them, they will help you. If they don't, then you're just pumping them for information, then they won't. So I would recommend to speak to 2 or 3 agents. A, you're going to be getting to know them. B, you'll be getting some valuable information. And then when you finish up the conversations with those agents, you want to say, look, would you mind if I ask for permission to call them again? Would you mind if I follow up with you? Maybe you've got some opportunities I could look at. Maybe in the next couple of weeks, I could give you a shout, or could you put me on your list of anything that you've got? And do you ever get off market opportunities? Because it would be great to be on that list, because I'm really keen. I've got cash ready to go. All music to an agent's ears. So we're getting a picture of what this commercial yield will be, and the rent, the kind of tenant demand, etc. And if it looks like there's lots of tenant demand, if it looks like or it might be that we're doing something to the property where we could create tenant demand, like splitting it up or reconfiguring it or whatever. So, and then we must work out our multiple exits. So we work out our multiple exits, and then we will look at working up an offer. And, so we've done various, we've looked at the tech, we've done desktop research, we've spoken to the selling agent, we've spoken to several agents. You probably want to follow up with the other agents that you're speaking to, maybe even get a report from them first, or at least an email with a bit of evidence. And we offer, and we get our offer accepted. And then when we get our offer accepted, the only way that you can really know about whether you're paying the right price, whether the yield that you're putting in place is right, is by getting a valuation report. And even if you're buying cash, you should get a valuation report from a valuer who acts for banks, because a valuer, again, it's an art, not a science. So from experience, if you're instructing the valuer and you're basically saying to them, look, can you value this property for me? They will have their optimistic pencil in their hand at that point. They will be thinking, oh, this person's instructing me. They want the value to be as high as possible. So I'm going to kind of value it super high. And then, but what a bank valuer will do is they'll work on the assumptions that the bank will be working on. So that might be vacant possession value. It might be, for sale value, whatever it might be. And then you can ask them to put in special assumptions. So yes, okay, a bank would value on maybe vacant possession. But actually, please, can you put in market values? Can you put in market value assuming that I extend all the leases to 10 years, or whatever your asset management is, that I let the vacant property or whatever it might be. So the only way you can really know is by getting that valuation report in your grubby mitts, looking at it, looking at the comparable evidence. And of course, once you've got that valuation report, you've then got comparable evidence in there, you've got valuation methodology. And if you're looking to buy a similar type of property in that location, again, you've got the information at your fingertips. You can really go back through that valuation report and work it through. Now, of course, you can get a valuation report done before you offer. And that is a very valid way of going ahead. You'll have some real surety on what that property's worth. The problem with that is that these valuation reports are not cheap. Depending on the size of the property, you could be talking somewhere between £3,500 to £7,000. Probably more like the 3.5, but it just depends. Obviously, for huge properties, you're going to be paying significantly more. So you need to be pretty serious that you're going to, or pretty sure you're going to get hold of that property. Otherwise, you're going to be dropping £3,500 willy-nilly on a load of properties that you're interested in, which is why I recommend that once you've had your offer accepted, you get a valuation report done at that point. And then you can proceed with the finance on that basis, or you can buy cash. But you know that when you've done your asset management, you've got an estimate of what it's worth. What we want to do is force value through. We want to add value to commercial property. And so that's why we want to kind of get these special assumptions in place. And so that's basically the process you want to go through. It's not rocket science, but you do need to put yourself out there. You do need to do some work. But I'm telling you, the first time you do it in a location, it's time consuming and it's a little bit scary if you've never done it before. But After that, you've done your research, you've built relationships, you've got your valuation report. It should be so much easier, which is why niching makes commercial investing so much easier, because you need to do this research in every location you're looking to buy a property. So why not buy properties in locations where you've got this information at your fingertips? What that also means is you can move quicker. You can, you've got great relationships, so you're probably likely to receive properties off market or receive them before they go to market. And so you've got better opportunities coming to you, you've got off market deals coming to you, and you can stack those deals a lot quicker than you can if you're starting off in a new location, having to build these relationships from scratch. So relationships with commercial agents are really key. If you're feeling a little bit daunted or intimidated by your relationships with commercial agents, why not practice in a separate area, an area that you're not interested in, where you can practice those conversations. And you never know, you might find properties that actually you want to buy. So it's definitely worth kind of having a little practice. Because it can be quite intimidating. You've kind of got one chance with these commercial agents locally, because they do hold the deals at their fingertips, and they do kind of know those markets really, really well. So commercial yields or risk yields, a bit of an art, not a science, but there's a process that you can follow to try and find out what those yields are. And I really hope this has helped you, because I do find that it can be quite intimidating, especially for new investors kind of going through that process.